and such heartbreak, such sorrow. Luckily, you don't have to go it alone. You have me.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian.
First things first, before we move forward, I want to take a quick minute. We lost a very important person to the two of us yesterday. Gentleman by the name of David Wise, who a lot of our listeners might remember as the writer of Batman the Animated episodes like If You're So Rich, or If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich? And The Clock King. He's also the guy who is probably the person who brought everything you love about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to into existence.
He essentially gave them... He didn't create the Ninja Turtles, but gave them their distinct personalities, right? Like
Yeah.
he was the one who helped us tell the difference between Michelangelo and Donatello and how they had different characteristics and attributes.
Yeah, he the original Eastman and Laird comic books were really sort of one character times four. They all had red bandanas. Well, it was a black and white comic, but on the covers that were color, they were all red bandanas, and there were no real personalities between them. No one said cowabunga. That's all David Wise. He brought them. He brought everything you love about those characters.
He's the reason they ate pizza.
No.
Was that the show?
I think that's the comic. I think in the comic there was.
That's the original comic.
I think so. I cannot remember because I used to read the comics, and then sort of stopped when the animated series came into play.
That's weird because for me it's the opposite. Usually an animated series is what pulls me in, and then I start to consume everything else, and I was a huge fan of that show. Did he ever write on that show?
He was the showrunner.
Oh, really?
He's the guy. He's literally the guy that developed that show and took the comic and turned it into the cartoon. He was the head writer, story editor. When we say that he gave them their personalities, it's because the toy company and that wanted to turn it into a cartoon then came to him and said, "Hey, how do we do this? How do we adapt these characters?" And he's like, "Oh my God, I can't wait to adapt these characters. But just so you know, they aren't characters." And so I remember him telling the story of each turtle needing to be one of the four words of the title. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but he specifically wanted Michelangelo to be the teenager. That's why he does the cowabunga dude. He is the teenage.
He's like the impulsive one with, he's kind of careless and reckless, but like super lovable.
Yeah. And I think Raphael was the mutant, and I don't remember why that is. The one that embodied ninjas was Leonardo, because he was the one who was who was the most reverent toward their lifestyle and toward Master Splinter. And then the one that embodied what it meant to be a turtle. I guess the mutant may have been Donatello because he was the really super smart one. But the one that embodied what it meant to be a turtle was Raphael. It was one of, but the whole thing was like, that's how he came up with the characters. Anyway, 2 nights ago, David passed away of lung cancer. He was a dear friend of ours. You can find him on one of our panels. I actually put it up on our Patreon just so that people could listen to it. You can go and check that out. That's entirely free. There's no paywall there. But it's the panel where we brought him and Eric and Julia Lawald and Henry to come and talk about the psychology of animated series, like writing for animated series. And he had a lot of really great, intelligent things to say, but the guy was just a really great, intelligent man anyway. I mean, there were so many things that we could say about him. Just a super nice guy, and his wife Audrey was fantastic, and they had us over to their house a couple of times and for movie nights, and showed you the Castle of Cagliostro for the first time. And the one story that I absolutely remember regarding our podcast is right around the time that we were starting the podcast, we made sure to let him know, and he always wanted to know when new episodes were going up, especially if they were episodes that he wrote. He got so defensive over our episode on If You're So Smart, Then Why Aren't You Rich? And it's because, as you and I said in the very beginning of this podcast, we were never, ever talking down about the writers. We understood that it's a 22-minute show that has to be filled. What we were going to do was judge the characters based on what we saw in those 22 minutes. And he would text me. He would literally text me. He'd be like, hey, because I remember in that episode we were talking about how Batman was more willing to go through the maze and solve the puzzles than he was to simply fly over the maze and rescue the guy at the center.
Like he had the ability to just bypass the maze.
Yeah. The overhead was completely open, and you could just fly over it and do it. But I remember us sort of judging Batman for that decision, and he'd just be like, Brian, he didn't do that at all. He had to do this and this and this. And I'm like, no, I get it. I'm not judging you as a writer. I'm judging Batman as a character. And he's like, Brian, it's a 22-minute TV show. He's got to solve Riddler's.
There has to be a story in there somewhere.
And I'm like, I know. And that's one of the things that I loved about him so much was he took the writing so seriously, but he also was super smart. And like all of those different riddles were things that just came out of his head. And he was always a pleasure to be around. So I was very sad to hear that he had passed a couple of nights ago. So this episode of the Arkham Sessions is dedicated to our friend David Wise. God, where do we go from here? We launched our Patreon. There are a lot of really great articles and videos that you and I have put up over the last couple of weeks. You get to see us react comically to the unboxing of Mr. Freeze from Mondo, the 1/6 scale.
I just didn't expect to have such difficulty with opening all the different parts and the different compartments. And then the challenge with getting the different pieces, his interchangeable hands and head and his stupid gun.
Yeah, gun.
There's a video of us struggling through the unboxing and getting frustrated with it. But the figure itself is amazing.
Magnificent.
It's wonderful.
It's great.
It is meant to be seen and not touched and played with and maneuvered. Like once you have it, I'm looking at it right now. Once you have him posed exactly how you want it, then everything is right with the world. But getting it there was a struggle.
Unless you're used to doing this sort of thing, which you and I aren't. We're used to getting a lot of toys and opening them up and doing, but not necessarily of this collector quality. So we were not accustomed to just how sturdy this thing is put together. But yeah, you can go over to our Patreon and check that out. But what we have not discussed over at Patreon yet is the revelation of the new Batmobile. Drea, what did you think of the new Batmobile?
Well, I want to see more of it. It's again, it's like the suit. You're only seeing some angles. You're only seeing it through the darkness of the night. You know, like the images we're getting are not crisp and clear. But from what I'm seeing, it's amazing. It's definitely a new Batmobile. It's so different.
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of like the Neil Adams Batman Odyssey from 2010, where it's sort of a muscle car
Yeah, it's
look
angular.
and feel.
It's kind of, it looks like a sports car. Looks like a Bat sports car. We got good news. We are definitely going to be at WonderCon. Well, I shouldn't say definitely. We are planning to go to WonderCon.
As long as coronavirus doesn't cancel WonderCon.
Yeah, we're seeing Emerald City Comic Con has definitely been impacted by the coronavirus. We're seeing some colleagues, professionals, talent pull out of their panels and their appearances. WonderCon is just around the corner. It's in early mid-April. We know that we have at least one panel confirmed, which is exciting for us because it's I don't think we're allowed to talk about it just yet, but what I think I can say is that it's a return of a topic that we've done many times.
An oldie but a goodie.
A versus. So I'm so excited, and I know that, as you know, I work at a university, and because we have 40 to 45,000 students who come and go on our campus, and many students are traveling for spring break or planning on traveling or coming back from different countries, like most universities around the world. This is definitely impacting our health protocols. We're being preventative. But I guess what I'm saying is it's definitely been impacting my day-to-day work, just in how present this risk is. And then these trade shows, we're seeing some people, really be impacted. Their businesses are impacted. Their productivity is impacted. I really hope that no more shows are going to be significantly impacted the way that Emerald City has been.
Yeah.
So we are planning on being at WonderCon, and hopefully it will work out that way.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. Drea, let's go ahead and start talking about this episode. I wasn't going to mention this, but this past week, someone left us a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or whatever it's called. And I'm not bothered by reviews or, negative reviews. Of course, I love positive reviews, but this person left a 3 out of 5 star review. Not because they didn't like the content of our show, not because they didn't like you, not because they didn't like me, but because they wanted us to stop talking about Doom Patrol. 140 some odd episodes worth of content, and it's Doom Patrol that has them leave a 3 out of 5 star review. Now, this doesn't really bother me. I'm all game for people leaving honest reviews. But then we get to a show like this, an episode that is so worth it. It's called Therapy Patrol. Mm-hmm. How can we not keep going when there's an episode called Therapy Patrol? And I will say it is not really a tongue-in-cheek title.
No.
They are genuinely sitting around talking with one another about, and we see things in sort of a Rashomon, while one thing is happening in this side of the house, another thing is happening over here, and they all interconnect until eventually they come together and we see a bigger picture. But going into this episode, you must have been head over heels after 6 solid episodes of traumatic event after traumatic event and little nuggets of information about someone's past and whatever. Now we are getting an opportunity to take those nuggets and that trauma and turn it into a serious plot point for this series. What did you think?
Well, I think I've said this before, but Doom Patrol is not my pick. Like, it's not my favorite show. And we went in this direction for a number of reasons. We felt that this would give us an opportunity to talk about, a live action show for one, but also to explore some characters that that we knew were going to be dynamic in this way. I thought about other shows to cover, like Umbrella Academy or Watchmen, and I have to admit that the first few episodes of this show of Doom Patrol were fine. Like, I felt like they were strong, but just didn't have the depth that I was looking for as much. This episode, I think, brings things together. I don't know. It was like each episode, you're right, each episode up till this one gave us some background, some turning points and some histories that I felt were important to everybody's psychology or to the individual storylines. And I think this is the episode I kind of wish this were sooner in the series, because I would have originally, when the show came out, I probably would have stuck around.
That's interesting, because I am the opposite in that I don't think you could have this episode be earlier in the series. I feel like by this point, I genuinely care about each one of these characters enough that when they sit down to discuss their individual problems, and let's give a firm clap to the writers for deciding that this is a plot point. They come to the realization that, especially after having seen the original Doom Patrol, that this is how Mr. Nobody wins. He gets into your heads, he turns you each against one another with your baggage, and suddenly you are literally doomed. You cannot succeed against him. And Cliff realizes that and says, we need to put this all out on the table now, because this is what he is doing to us. And Rita backs him up. And so they genuinely sit down together and have group therapy.
And it's Cliff who initiates that. I mean, they all have a very challenging, difficult past, and they all have a lot emotionally that they're dealing with. So it's interesting that Cliff is the one who, despite having lost quite a lot in his life, his wife, his daughter, although it's revealed that she's not dead, but she certainly isn't in his life, and then his body. He's in this. He's a cyborg. He's in what's primarily. It's
not even a cyborg.
Yeah, he's
just a big robot.
He's primarily in a robot body, and he only has his brain. Technically, he's a cyborg, but because he has his brain, but he's predominantly just a big clunky metal robot, right?
Yeah.
And he is the one who initiates the idea, the process of working together and talking about what their past is and understanding how they came to be. And
he's very zealous about it. He's very...
there's something weird about the level of his anger in this episode. But you're right about Mr. Nobody, who is... Mr. Nobody is harnessing the accurate point that people are not just ill or troubled or different or just simply, making the wrong choices. People are who they are because of what happened to them.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about this before as far as psychology and clinical psychology, and asking ourselves not just, what are the things that seem different or maladaptive or bizarre, but rather what happened to a person to lead to some of the behaviors we're seeing, the emotions we're seeing, and the decision making, the judgment they have, the insight they have. And so Mr. Nobody is really harnessing that consideration with what Robot Man, I keep wanting to say ribbit, like Twilight Zone ribbit.
It's a ribbit.
What Robot Man is realizing or framing as like their souls. Mr. Nobody is trying to take over and violate their souls. He doesn't use that word. He uses the F word. But I think that's kind of an interesting concept that Mr. that Robot Man feels like he is who he is because of his past, and that his soul is primarily what he experienced. His soul is his history, his origin, his experiences. And I think that's kind of an interesting way to frame it.
More than we have in the past few episodes, I kind of want to go down the list of people as we see them happen. We see them sit down in one of the main rooms where they have their group meetings. And of course, as we mentioned, Robot Man wants to initiate this therapy, and the others are very, very hesitant. Just to give you an idea as how excited he is and how passionate he is about this plea, I've got just a small snippet of audio here. Let's take a quick listen.
None of you have any issues. Nothing it wouldn't help to get off your chest. Well, this is fucking awkward.
They're not into the idea of talking about it at all.
Well, who is?
Right.
We aren't naturally. I mean, it's interesting because he's come to a point where he realizes he needs to confess. He needs to have a cathartic and expressive way to talk about his past and talk about what's hurting him. And he seems to be convinced that that's going to be healing for him.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, I mean, I would say a considerable amount of people would feel quite uncomfortable with this invitation and may not readily want to share the hardships and the pain that they have.
And it occurs to me that even though you and I as audience members have seen what a number of these people are going through, none of them actually know.
Right.
So this episode is an opportunity for them to reveal to one another. And then in doing so, revealing more to us, the audience, even more in depth, their own histories and their own traumas. So it's an interesting way of doing it. I want to talk a little bit about Rita, because she is the first thing that we cut to. We see her waking up that day. And we sort of, as we mentioned when they were in the little motel room together, we see what she has to go through each and every day just to get out of bed. Literally just to get out of bed. Presumably while she's sleeping, she has no control over her form. So as we are introduced to her, she is basically sludge under the covers. And the amount of concentration it takes to just form Rita each and every morning must be exhausting. But I noticed as we are, as it was sort of introduced in the previous episode, at least the origin of it, she is continuing that mantra that the person, the person who is breathing is me, is Rita, which you said was great, even though the person who gave her that mantra didn't turn out to be all that great. The fact that she is still using that for herself is great. And there's a moment where, and it's a comical moment where she can keep herself from going down a grate, which then sends her into the air shafts, which then sends her basically down into a boiler. And she's just trying to maintain control of her body. But then there's a moment where, as she's repeating this mantra over and over again, she looks over a chair and she hears the sound of a baby. Let's take a listen to what Rita's reaction to that sound is.
The person who is sick of having creepy baby imagery shoved in her face is me. The person who is sick of being judged is me. The person who deserves this is me. Maybe I am just a ball of slime. Maybe I always was a ball of slime. baby. The real trick is being the best goddamn ball of slime I can be.
What I like about this moment is that it's Rita looking down on herself, reaching rock bottom once again. But unlike the Rita of previous episodes, she starts to pick herself back up. She's not relying on other people helping her or giving her the emotional support. She is deciding to take this disadvantage and look at it a different way. And so I think Rita has come a significant way in these 7 episodes. It's one of those reasons why I don't think you could necessarily have this episode come earlier, is you need to love Rita in order to love that she has gotten this far. Mm-hmm. We see her background, which is that she was a child whose parents maybe wanted her to be a star a little too much. They got an opportunity to meet her. She won a pageant and got to meet an actress that she loved, and it almost seemed to be a bit foreshadowing because she may as well have been Rita, this actress.
Right.
She had the same sort of displeasure when being bothered by normal people.
Everything was so performative that she had to kind of put on this role. Even when she wasn't acting, she had to put on this role of this proper starlet. But we also see that, or how Rita was as a child, and that her parents were quite controlling of her. And the hint there is that she may not have wanted. She's clearly mesmerized by this actress that she gets to meet, but she may not have wanted the lifestyle that she ended up getting. It's as if we're understanding that she had a history of lacking control. Yeah. That she never really had ownership of her body, her look, her exterior,
or even her interior. It seems like she, from the moment her mother even says that she's been basically like this since she was old enough to coo. Like, she's, as a baby, they saw star potential in her, and they tried to push her into the spotlight. And you start to realize that Rita has never even had her own personality. She has only been this construct of her parents. In fact, Rita's not even her real name. It's her stage name, and her parents make her use it. So we don't even know what her real name is. And you kind of get the impression that it doesn't even matter because Rita has never even been that little girl. Rita has always been Rita Farr. And later in the episode, we come back to this idea, and Rita's got a wonderful dialogue, a piece of dialogue when we really boil down to the core of her self-realization. Let's take a listen.
All I know is that Rita Farr was not a good person. In fact, she was never a person at all. Rita was an illusion, made of light and celluloid and the best hair and wardrobe in the business. And now I have to confront the truth. If there is no Rita Farr, then there's nothing else there. I don't know what I am. I don't even know who I am.
Holy shit. You just talked your legs into being legs.
So as she's talking, as she is learning, even subconsciously, the power of therapy. She's getting this out, and suddenly she is solid again.
Yeah. It's similar to the mantras that she's telling herself, this sense of, one thing we're learning is that the affirmations are helpful. The affirmations being the self-statements, the positive psychology she's using, reflecting her determination. I can get out of this furnace. In that beginning scene, she's essentially like a worm with a head, like quite literally. She doesn't have her limbs, and she's trying to morph out of the blob figure that she's stuck in, and she's using these very self-encouraging, realistic phrases to herself. I can get through this. I'm not perfect. And she even clings on to the idea that she has made mistakes. And I think that's a turning point for her. She acknowledges, and we don't know the full story behind this baby. There was some trauma related to a baby, another woman, a potential death. Yeah. Definitely a loss.
Yeah, we've seen little hints at this. And what I liked about this episode is they didn't tell everything. They didn't lay it all out.
I thought we were going to learn. I thought we were going to find out, but we didn't. And she kind of has this moment of reflecting on acknowledging that she's not perfect, like acknowledging that she's had setbacks and she's made mistakes, and then giving herself the encouragement that despite those failures and despite making bad decisions, she can still move forward. And that's how she pushes herself out of her worm configuration. She gets back into a human body, but she can't get her legs back. And what's interesting, you're right, it's only through that therapeutic process during which she is able to acknowledge that, like, the reason I'm in transition, the reason I can't have a solid sense of self is that I don't know who I am. I've been told, I've been controlled. It goes from her family, her parents, to the entertainment industry, the harassment and the assault that she's experienced by these high level figures in the entertainment business. And then, the Harvey Weinstein type figure that we saw several episodes ago. Right. And then in her current life, her adult life, the relationship she had with Chrome Dome, whoever that was. I don't remember his name.
Yes, Mento.
Mento, right?
Just Mento.
So and he controlled her. So she's here saying, after all these years, I don't know what it's like to have a sense of control over myself. I don't really know what it's like to be me. And it's a revelation that then allows her to actually get control back of her legs.
Yeah, this might be the first time that she's ever actually understood agency.
Yeah.
Even if she's thought she had in the past, this is the first time that she's ever really understood it. And it sort of suggests in this moment that, and I don't know how you feel about it, as a psychologist, I would love to hear your take. Mine was that all the mantras in the world can help you, but only to a certain degree. It really takes more work than simply repeating a phrase. You have to really dig in and do the therapeutic work in order for that mantra to mean anything. So she could spend the entire episode repeating this phrase over and over and over again, but not regain the use of her legs or the form of her legs. Right. It's when she stops thinking about gaining the form of her legs. It's when she really starts looking at her past and at who she is and starts revealing and making herself vulnerable that the legs just form on their own without any concentration whatsoever. Mm-hmm. The therapy is what's doing the work that the mantra couldn't fully. And I appreciated that. We go from Rita to Larry. Now, Larry, we know a lot about him at this point. We've spent a significant amount of time learning that every waking moment for him is traumatic. He is constantly reliving his sorrows, either in his memory or the entity inside of him is showing him things. And we are starting to understand more 7 episodes in that this is a symbiotic relationship. The entity is not just doing these things to torture him as he always thought it was. It is actually being tortured by having to relive this trauma as much as he is, and then he is turning it back on Larry in order to force him to have these therapeutic moments. And it's hard for the entity because it doesn't really remember everything detail for detail. So what we see is a moment that was particularly painful for Larry, where he is making out with his partner in the back of a pickup truck and details are wrong. And he starts yelling at the entity that this is sort of traumatic to relive this moment, and the details aren't even right.
Well, he says it's the biggest mistake, like that part of his life was the biggest mistake of his life, which it's interesting because it's a scene that lives in his memory, but John's there, and for John to be there, and I know he's just in his memory, but to hear Larry say that this is a mistake, I think is very reminiscent of what it must have been like for him in the actual situation, in the actual memory. Yeah,
he views this relationship as a mistake, and we see that even as a child, his parents knew all along that he was gay, but refused to admit it. His father refused to admit it. His mother did admit it, but she understood that this was the end of their lives as they knew it. Everything was crumbling down around them if everyone found out that their son was gay. And he heard that and then decided to bottle up who he was. And the entity shows him the same event 2 or 3, at least 3 times, where it changes different details in order to make it closer to real. And you start to think, oh, well, this entity is just showing him these things to sort of torture him. When actually what it is the entity is trying to therapize him. He's trying to get him to relive these moments and experience these things right up until a point that Larry finally breaks through and yells at the entity. Let's take a listen to this big revelation.
If we're stuck with each other, the least you can do is understand me. We may share memories, but you have no idea how hard it was living this way. The lies, the fear, the threat of losing everything if anyone so much as questioned my sexuality. You want to fill in the margins of this nightmare? Add the flight crew locker room, the gay jokes echoing off the walls. Add the 2 boys found dead and hogtied outside Pendleton. You want to know why I couldn't be with John? You want to know what's missing from this fantasy? Fucking context! Wow. You have no idea how long I waited to hear those words. I'm preaching to the choir. No. I wanted you to admit it to yourself.
So the entity is using John as a conduit in order to get through.
To communicate with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the same way that the group is bonding more by these experiences, I feel like Larry and the entity are now starting to understand one another as well. They're starting to communicate more. And we used to know that whenever the entity would leave his body, he was essentially dead. He was a lifeless shell. But now the entity is spending time in there, not just leaving. And he is sort of trying to massage this whole relationship a bit. And I like that they're both giving a little.
Well, I think the entity is symbolic of his sexuality. Like the entity is, although it's this energy, it's a spirit. It's kind of a constellation of lights that comes into his body and out, and we don't really understand it beyond that. This is the episode that really gives us a better understanding of the functioning of, or the purpose of, this energy or this entity. And I think it's interesting that the parallels are there with Larry rejecting the entity, Larry not wanting to be close to it, not wanting to align with it or be a part of it, not wanting to admit that he and the entity are actually intertwined and have a relationship, have a love. There's, we don't know what kind of love that is. It's undefined, but I feel like that is reminiscent of his dissonance with his sexuality when he was essentially in a secret relationship with John.
Yeah.
And that was very revealing. And I think what he said was painful, but it was also, it helps us understand his resentment. It helps us understand his isolation, why he doesn't really get close to people. And essentially he dislikes himself. He has internal homophobia. Like when we saw his parents, like, you're right, he was overhearing his parents argue with each other about him. And he was probably 10 years old. He was just a child when he heard the level of just the hatred and the fear and the ignorance that they voiced to each other without knowledge that he could hear them. And
not just that he could hear them, but what that would mean for him for the rest of his life. This need to shove everything that he is down inside, which
it's a rejection. Yeah, it's a rejection of a huge. I mean, you said something really important, which is that this energy is actually becoming a part of him, and it gives him life, and it makes me. It makes me think that it is a symbolism. It's a representation of his identity. And that for years and years, the very thing that made him who he was, what gave him life, is what he was trying to reject and hate and neglect in his life. I think it's important too, to acknowledge that his parents' treatment of him, his parents, the perspective they had, is a huge part of how he feels about himself. And that this is a character that actually never really came out. We didn't really have a coming out moment, at least yet. And there's some research that looks into not just the experience of coming out and the healing, positive, affirming experiences that come with that, but also the importance of parental support and acceptance for a person who's coming out. And what that research finds is that, well, this is hopefully very common knowledge already, that LGBT people have an increased risk of health problems and mental health problems, mostly because of the psychosocial experiences that they have, the stressors related to their identity.
I want to make it very clear, just for those listening, and you're saying it now, but for the lay people, I want them to understand the fact that they are LGBTQ does not make them high risk of mental issues already. It's the stressor. It's what you have talked about in the past about repeated stressors, repeated traumas are going to affect you.
That's a great point, Brian. Let's articulate that. Overt prejudice, which we saw on this show, bias, which we're seeing in this show, expectations and vigilance about discrimination. So meaning that these individuals experience hatred and actual behavioral discrimination, and they also build a hypervigilance about that, something that you and I have talked about on and off this show, that even the vague, sometimes ambiguous experiences that involve the looks, the avoidances, the jokes, those are the microaggressions that we experience sometimes that can be interpreted as stressful.
Yeah.
as well as the internalized stigma, which is what we're seeing with Larry, this long-standing pervasive experience of being in a society that treats you differently, that demeans you, that characterizes you as different and less than the straight population in this situation, right? So the internalized stigma is incredibly impactful when it comes to someone's level of stress. And then finally, the concealment of sexual orientation. And that's what's happening with Larry, that concealment, the suppression, the need to hide his identity. So as he's living his everyday life, he has to suppress not just his urges, his personality, his relationships, the way he can relate to others and interact with others, even his opinions and his perspectives.
He has to lie to everyone,
Yes.
including himself, to make that lie more believable to everyone that he comes in contact with, so that they don't question his sexuality, but more to the point, so they don't question his humanity, his, at the time, especially, and I'm not even going to say at the time, today, there are people who do not see these people as equals. They are broken in some way. And it's incredibly damaging to have that thought about these people.
That's why conversion therapy existed, conversion therapy still exists.
Yeah.
It is not recognized by the psychological or psychiatric fields, but the idea that you can pray the gay away, or that you can receive enough therapy to heal these, sinful urges. Now, clearly, you and I know that's completely hateful and prejudiced and even inaccurate. But we see especially in Larry's story, that he's experiencing those environmental and social factors. And one thing that he actually mentioned too is violence, actual violence against gay individuals, as well as threats of violence. And so I can imagine that he would do anything to preserve his own safety, his sense of value in society. His dignity is so important to him, and he would rather preserve that than give in to this love that he has for John.
Yeah, and the sad part is, even if the violence coming from the outside doesn't affect you, a lot of times avoiding that and lying to yourself then leads to self-violence.
Right.
It leads to just damaging yourself, hurting yourself, and in many cases for LGBTQ folks, it ultimately means suicide, which you can see this man has reached a level of depression so great that he has said in the past, "Why don't you just let me die?" to this entity that keeps him going. And so, it's a man who even now doesn't want to face that reality and admit that reality to anyone.
And he
around him.
has this turning point with the entity giving him, I thought this was actually really lovely. The entity gave him a safe memory, like yes, it's a simulation. It's not real, but it's a safe memory to freely love his partner and enjoy their time together as if it were real.
Yeah.
And not have the heavy stress and pressures of needing to be something he's not. And I thought that was a really lovely gift that the entity left his body in that moment
to let him have
it, which is an interesting dynamic. And then in the group, I'm calling it group therapy, but we'll talk about why this isn't group therapy.
Okay.
But in the group therapy, he voices, Cliff is kind of urging him to talk more about what's causing him emotional pain. And Larry, he confesses that not that he's gay. He confesses that he had this life that he is essentially rejecting, that he's filled with self-hatred, and he voices this. And it made me think about his coming out, that this is the closest thing he's had to coming out. And again, coming out does not guarantee an end to the stress.
Sure.
Context matters. And I love that Larry had already kind of introduced the idea that context is extremely important. The research shows that coming out can actually increase or precipitate additional stressors, actual physical or verbal abuse, and worsen health risk behaviors like suicide, like you mentioned, suicide risk, depending on the social structure and the individuals who are in a person's life. And so again...
So the support system, you mean?
Yeah. So his parents would have actually increased his risk. They may have rejected him. He may have ended up homeless. He may have ended up struggling to find support elsewhere. And that may have actually increased his stress. I wonder if his not coming out, at least growing up, could have protected him from further stress.
For sure. And certainly while he was in the military. I mean...
Great point. Because would he have had support there?
He sort of mentions Pendleton. He mentions the two gay boys who had been hogtied and killed just outside Pendleton. So the illusion there, the inference that I get, is that somebody on that base killed those, hogtied and killed those boys.
Yeah.
So he's talking about the daily threat of being attacked, beaten, or killed if he were to come out to those people where he lived.
It was a matter of protecting his life.
Yeah.
And here, although Cliff is kind of an a-hole about it, underlying his jokes, I think that the team here is particularly supportive of Larry, and hopefully he feels a sense of visibility and acknowledgement and affirmation from the people there. And that is what group therapy is for. Like that is where I would say this is definitely group therapy, because you feel safe enough to say something about your past and your pain, and you have people around you who are also flawed, who say, we see you, we understand it, we're here for you.
Yeah.
We want to help you. And I'm mad that his parents didn't provide him that when he was 10. But at least he's getting it now.
Yeah. Let's move on to Cyborg, Vic, because he is sort of becoming a new person now that he has been rebuilt and his father has given him access to himself and he has turned on the privacy mode. So he is genuinely becoming his own person. He's learning things about himself that he didn't know before. For instance, he never realized that he had over 200 messages at a dating profile called Cash until now, because his father was preventing all of that information from getting to him. He saw it as a distraction. And now we're learning that this guy who's basically had to live the life of a machine for the last several years is now given the opportunity to live a life of a boy, of a teenage boy. Once he decides to reject certain things and continue his mission to look for Niles Calder, he also asks his AI to engage Cash and let him know who's been messaging him so that he can engage back with them. And we get more self-hatred to some degree. Let's take a listen to him responding to girls on Cash.
Pull up Cash. Sup, Janice? That's one lucky beagle.
Oh my God, you wrote back? This is Cyborg, right?
Please, call me Vic.
Okay, Cyborg. LOL.
Swipe left.
So you play football, huh?
Yeah. Profile's a little old, though.
LOL, no kidding. Show me your metal part.
Nope.
Do you need a sidekick? Say booyah. Come on, just say it. Say booyah. It's your thing.
Great. Have I ever said booyah?
You have said booyah 31 times since the accident, well above the threshold for a catchphrase.
So he's learning more and more that
LOLOL.
LOLOLOLOL.
I get what's happening here, but this is not how women interact on
well, it might
Tinder.
be how teen girls are interacting on. This is not Tinder. This is Cash.
Okay.
And you forget he's a member of the Teen Titans, or at least should be.
Yeah, they're fangirling.
They are fangirling. They do not have any interest in Vic as a human being. They have interest in him as Cyborg, which is all he wants to reject. He desperately wants to reject Cyborg, and so after this moment, a little more self-hatred comes in. He actually starts engaging with this other girl who genuinely seems interested. She doesn't ask him who he is. She just, there's a little bit of flirtatious conversation back and forth. But that's when he realizes that by shutting off certain inhibitors in his computer, the AI is now giving him access to his subconscious. He wants to know what this girl's doing right now. And the AI starts plugging into a bus feed that shows him exactly what she's doing right now, which is now invading her privacy, which, as we know about Vic, is very important to him, his privacy. Right. And so now he's spying on this girl who's having this conversation
sort of
with
reluctantly. Like he didn't realize that thinking about or wondering what she was doing now would lead to actual footage
of her in that moment.
Yeah.
And but what's interesting is once he realizes he has access to it, he doesn't shut it down. He continues to watch her. She's on public transit, so it's not like she's in the bathroom or anything. But she asks him for a recent photo. And he decides to come out of his shell a little bit, no pun intended, and he takes a selfie and shows her that he is metallic, that,
he pulls up his shirt like you all do when you want to do like...
You all?
Well...
I challenge you to
like
find a photo of me.
Like some
like a model, like a guy who wants to show off his abs.
I've seen this before.
Oh, absolutely.
You just pull your shirt up with one hand and you show your chest and then you take the shot.
Take the selfie.
Where for him... he has a chest full of metal.
Yeah.
And, I think...
It's all metal.
It's all metal.
Not organic
and
at all.
it's actually quite impressive. Like, that's a cool shot that he sends her.
Yeah.
But she's not into it.
Yeah, she reacts very poorly. Now, to her credit, we do not know what she was reacting to. In that very moment, she may have received a photo. She could have gotten a dick pic. We don't know.
You mean from someone else?
From someone else. He assumes that it was him, and he instantly tells the AI to delete his profile from Cash. So he is getting that internal struggle that everyone else is getting as well, trying to find himself and trying to find balance between Vic and the fact that he is and forever will be Cyborg from here on out. At this moment, the AI informs him that a threat is en route, and he turns around and gets punched by Robot Man, by Cliff, completely unprovoked. And Cliff is now raving about Clara being his teenage daughter, who we saw in the final moments of the last episode has taken to calling Bump, Cliff's mechanic and best friend, Dad. She is essentially admitting that she has adopted him as a father figure, and that sends Cliff off the deep end. Cliff is now attacking Cyborg, and we don't know why. Eventually, we start to see, in what I thought was a really great moment, he gets into the van. He cranks the van's engine. He drives over to Bump's house, reveals that he's not dead, asks him about Clara. Bump then says something to the effect of, If I had if I'd known you weren't really dead all this time, I wouldn't have adopted the snotty brat. She took away my game. I no longer was single. I was now raising a daughter, because if you remember, Cliff also killed his wife in that crash. So Clara, of course, needed to be adopted by someone. And then we start to see that, and this is where Rashomon comes into play. Do you know Rashomon?
No.
Okay.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Wonderful Kurosawa movie about an event that happens, and you see it from different perspectives and how each one experienced it differently.
It's like POV.
Yes, it is POV. So in this moment, we now realize that some of the things we've been seeing in other people's stories, Cliff is now experiencing as this interaction with Bump that isn't really happening. He's actually having this interaction with Vic, and Bump pulls out a sawed-off shotgun and shoots Cliff, which sends him through a wall where a shotgun shouldn't. And you realize, oh, that was Vic's arm cannon. Like, he is attacking his friends and not realizing it. Once they bring him back to his senses, he has a wonderful meltdown that I've got the audio for. Let's take a listen to Cliff.
What is wrong with me? All I want to do is cry. My brain, it's screaming for release. I'm so angry. Can't live like this. Ah! Why do I want to beat the shit out of Bump so bad? Irony is, Bump Weathers was probably a better dad to Clara than I would have been. Shit. I was already turned into my old man. Shit's the same. Same fights. Same apologies over and over. A vicious cycle. Maybe Clara's lucky. She got out. Maybe that's why I can't call Clara. Because the second thing I'm gonna have to explain after how the fuck am I alive is why it's me. Why is it me? Not her mom who came back. It should have been Kate. Oh God, it should have been Kate.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, we've got a guy who is now, this is rock bottom, and what sucks for Cliff is he doesn't have the biological functions necessary to release what he's feeling. I mean, we talk about Larry pinning everything up inside. Robot Man is literally a human brain inside of a machine and doesn't have the ability to cry, doesn't have the ability to release that stress that shouldn't even be there to begin with. I mean, he should be gone.
Right.
And he's having those moments of survivor's remorse. Why am I the one that survived and not her mother? Yeah, I mean, I felt a lot for Cliff in this moment, especially seeing a little bit of the self-revelation that he was becoming his father, who at the beginning of his story, we learned was also abusive. He was not a good dad. He was abusive towards his mother. And Cliff was afraid that he was becoming his father as well. And he's glad that his daughter has broken out of this cycle. Potentially. We don't know.
Right.
And everyone softens around Cliff in this moment. The person who seems to soften the most is Jane, who could even be Hammerhead in this moment. But we've seen a lot of contention over the two of them in the last few episodes, where he has tried to embrace her as a father figure to her, and she has been accusing him of trying to make her his surrogate daughter, which she finds to be disturbing. And now in this moment, her eyes went probably the most empathetic and softest of the bunch, which I fully appreciated. it's really only after all this that we find out that it was basically triggered by someone who has suffered even more trauma than any of these people, and that is Admiral Whiskers, who happens to be a rat outside the manor, who 6 episodes ago, his mother was teaching him to cross the street and she was hit by the van that they were driving. And now Mr. Nobody has gotten into the brain of Mr. Whiskers or Admiral Whiskers, and has convinced him, despite his woodland creature identity, to not seek vengeance. Mr. Nobody has even convinced Admiral Whiskers to find the person who did it.
Right, to seek vengeance.
And seek vengeance.
Which I found to be really interesting. Again, this knowledge that Mr. Nobody carries quite accurately, that if we are hyper-focused on a traumatic event and really convert that event into a sense of purpose in a very damaging way, we could become vengeful. We could become
you can go against you can go against your own programming.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a scary way in which Mr. Nobody can harness trauma and convince people that healing can come from destruction. Mm-hmm. And this little rat figures out that he can get into Robot Man through, I guess, that hole in his arm, and then crawl up into his body. I guess, and he's been messing with his brain.
Yeah.
Which is disturbing, because he crawls out of his mouth at the end of this episode
and goes out the window after
everyone's just stunned. Everyone watches this just completely perplexed by all of it. Although I do think that Cliff's, you called it a meltdown. I'll accept that. Like this loss of self-control and a complete giving in to the overwhelming feelings and the sense of hopelessness and the sense of overwhelming pain. Like I think that's what he was going through. And whether it was triggered by this rat or not, I'm not sure that matters to me, because it propels him to want to talk to the other members of this team and to realize that, I think you nailed it. He doesn't have the ability to cry. He cannot eat. He can't binge. He can't.
Yeah, he wants to remember what it is to eat a piece of toast, and yells it. And I want to make clear, I don't think his breakdown is because of the rat. I think the glitching that he eventually starts to go through, and the fact they have to tackle him and do all of that, I think all of that is because of the rat. Yeah. But I think the emotions that he is just vomiting in this moment are purely from the heart, whatever he has. I think that all of that is genuine.
And because he doesn't have the ability to manage it or self-regulate in the way that you and I might be able to, and whether it's destructive or not, because I mentioned binge eating, like some of us do all sorts of things to manage their emotions, from cutting to self-harm to burning to binge eating, to addictive substances, maybe some more adaptive things like crying and taking psychotropic medication. He can't do any of those things. He can't do any of those things. And he realizes that the only thing he can do is to talk.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that this does not look like group therapy to you. Explain, again, from that perspective of a professional psychologist who has seen group therapy. Describe the difference in what you have experienced and what we are seeing in this episode.
This is more like self-help, just in the sense that you don't have a facilitator. So group therapy should have an individual who is leading, facilitating, kind of creating boundaries for the group and not participating as a member of the group. That facilitator doesn't necessarily have to be a psychologist, but somebody who's able to have more of a neutral and expert level approach to the group. One thing that the facilitator is in charge of is the rules of the group. In other words, before the group even starts to discuss anything, group rules and procedures need to be established and agreed upon by every member.
Okay.
There are a number of things that I would consider, and that when I ran groups, I did consider as far as what those guidelines would be for group therapy. One is very important. It's confidentiality. So in other words, anything said in the group by any of the members or among the members is kept private among them. So they're not to talk about what's discussed there. It's Vegas. What happens here stays here, right? You can't talk about it outside of the group. And it's the facilitator who really ensures that happens by revisiting those guidelines and ensuring that folks know what it means when they say things are confidential in the group. The facilitator is also in charge of breaking confidentiality when they believe someone is in danger. Either someone outside the group might be at risk or someone in the group is at risk. So there's a safety component to this in terms of the facilitator. A sense of self-preservation and privacy is important. Sometimes it's called the stop rule, in that no one is ever required or obligated to answer every question or engage in every single activity. It is a volunteer basis. Attending the group is a volunteer basis, certainly, but having to share should be up to that person. Here in the show, Cliff is very pushy and tells everybody, you all have to share something. It's general enough that, maybe they can just share whatever they want to. And I think that's fine. Dignity is really important. And that's one of the guidelines. Treat everybody with dignity and respect. You can raise voices. You can have a conflict verbally. You might not agree with one another, but never humiliate, abuse, or engage in destructive behavior with one another. Of course, never use violence or intimidation. Don't harm another person or their property. Don't have exclusive relationships, which means don't date within the group or have exclusive relationships within the group, because it creates dynamics and triangles and feelings by other members that they're left out, and that's really not good for the group dynamic.
What if you're dating the whole group? Like, what
if you're all? What
if you have a relationship with every person
what's so funny?
in the group?
I knew you would ask this question because this is where your mind goes. I don't know.
Loopholes?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out ways around things?
Yeah, I guess. Or just group romance, whatever you want to call that. Only you would try to figure out how to have an orgy in this situation. I don't know how I would feel about that. I guess if everybody is consenting to relate to one another in that way, I suppose no one would feel left out. But I am one of those people that believes that anytime you have a dynamic like that where romantic feelings are involved, things can happen. There can be breakups. There can be disagreements. And the breakup could be so irreparable, so nasty that it could really disrupt the harmony of the group.
Right.
The one thing that I do, or that I used to do with all of my groups, is to ask them on day one, what rules and guidelines would you all want to have as part of this group? What is important for you to feel heard and safe and belonging, or a sense of belongingness in this group? And a couple of things are very commonly brought up. One is letting people talk. So I guess interrupting one another is kind of a human reflex. Sure. And it happens a lot. And my most experienced clients would say, I don't want to be talked over. So can we figure out a way for people not to interrupt each other? And the other thing that commonly comes up is judgment, just how people react to one another, and just to respond in a non-judgmental way. What questions do you have about group therapy other than can you have an orgy?
Well, I'm not suggesting within the hour of group therapy. I'm just saying if you're not supposed to have exclusive relationships, what if you have a relationship with everyone in the group, thus making it even? I mean, honestly, I think you've just answered a number of the questions that I would have had, which is basically, I've never experienced group therapy. I've never had the privilege of really experiencing therapy at all. So I'm fascinated by the differences in what happens in real life versus what we see on television or in film. And so getting this opportunity to ask you these questions or have you tell us how this is a dysfunctional version of group therapy. I mean, I'm sure as much as Cliff would like to be seen as the facilitator, maybe a guy who yells is not the guy that you want. That's not the guy you want.
I love him, but he's a bit unhinged in this episode. And
you brought up why. You brought up why, and it's because all he can do is talk. And so he feels like if I can just get everybody to do this too, I will all feel better.
Well, and a couple things about that. One is that, of course, the facilitator can certainly share some of the emotional and psychological experiences or the mental health conditions that the others in the group feel or have had. So it's not as if the facilitator has to be completely free of those shared or common experiences. And sometimes it's actually really helpful. It can be very conducive to a good discussion and a healing discussion if the facilitator has some life experience.
I mean, it's why, and again, this is the difference between film and television and maybe real life. I don't know, but it's why you see on film and TV, someone who is leading an AA meeting is someone who is been an alcoholic or.
It's a great example. Survivors of suicide attempts is another one where a person who facilitates that might really know from lived experience what it's like to be in that darkness and hopelessness and to help other people pull themselves out of it, as well as grief and loss groups, especially grief and loss. So, for Captain America to run his own grief and loss group after Infinity War would be a good idea because he's experienced similar. I mean, gosh, at that point, half the people in the universe have experienced a loss and could definitely be a good facilitator. But it really does strengthen their ability to manage the safety in the room, to be able to sense the nuances and offer their own advice. Group therapy is not heavy on advice. There's not a lot of strategy sharing when it comes to the facilitator directing it, but many types of group therapies could offer those opportunities to have like homework assignments and send the group home with maybe a skill to work on or a practice to strengthen between sessions. But Cliff is bringing up something which I think is really important too, which is the concept of talk therapy. Is he going to get better simply by talking about his problems?
Yeah, it's all he's got.
It is. And I'm hopeful about that because I know that at least in this country, there are several million people that are engaged in some kind of talk therapy, whether it's person to person or FaceTime or telemedicine. That talk therapy is actually quite commonly used in our culture. And it does work. It depends on what it is that you're targeting or treating. Certain conditions have a weakened response to talk therapy.
Let me ask you a question before you move forward, and it's possible that you're going to answer this anyway, but just for our listeners, especially those who have never experienced therapy, like myself, what is the difference between talk therapy and anything else? Like when you say, does talk therapy work? I think when most people think of therapy, they think of going into a room and talking to someone for an hour. And maybe if you're talking to a psychiatrist, they'll diagnose you medication afterward or
prescribe you medication.
Yeah. They what did I say?
You said diagnose you medication.
Oh, they'll diagnose you with something that requires medication. Yes. Prescribe you medication. What is the difference in what you are talking about right now?
Well, talk therapy is exactly what it sounds like. It is exchanging experiences, feelings, thoughts behaviors, actions through discussion. Most therapy is talk therapy. So you might have heard the term psychotherapy. That's a broader umbrella, but typically refers to talk therapy, because psychotherapy is usually referenced in contrast to psychiatric interventions or psychotropic medication, for instance, which is what you mentioned, receiving medication as therapy. So talk therapy is simply that. It's any kind of therapeutic exchange that involves talking. We discussed on the show last week some therapies that did not involve talking. So somebody working on your chakras, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, gotcha.
So that's not talk therapy. Tapping, it depends on what's done during the tapping. And to be clear, we were really honing in on pseudoscience, on the therapies that were primarily utilizing some kind of unseen energy as part of the healing process. Once you add talk therapy to any of those interventions, then you really do have talk therapy. Then the talk therapy becomes
the primary.
And I would say a pretty effective way to enhance the experiences of the crystals or the chakras or the other types of things that might be happening. Talk therapy is essentially what you would do to help you work out how to deal with negative thoughts and feelings and make some kind of change, usually a positive change in your life. So typically, the way I look at it, these kinds of sessions can help people who are feeling distressed by difficult events like adversity, trauma, experiences of loss or death, as well as to help people manage mental health problems like anxiety, depression, suicidality, post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic worry. So really identified symptoms, right, that they want to work on.
Right.
So those things would be targeted in therapy. But generally, talking is good for you. It is a way for you to kind of explore your internal workings. I've had students tell me, I've had them tell me a lot of things, but sometimes they'll tell me after a session, they'll tell me like, I feel better and I don't know why. And we'll even kind of discuss like, well, let's talk about that. Like how can you gain this feeling again? It maybe it doesn't have to be for me. Like maybe there's something about this experience that's helped you. And a lot of times they'll share like, well, I feel like my thoughts are better organized. Like you've helped me figure out some confusing or chaotic thoughts that have been swirling in my mind. Or they'll say, I feel like I was unsure about something and I'm a little bit more clear on what I want to do. A lot of students come to me to help them address problems in their lives, and they want assistance with making those decisions. They want to make those challenges more approachable. They're willing to work on some strategies or skills to overcome some of those challenges and difficulties. So in my work, talk therapy is what I would do in a sense of helping people understand patterns that they maybe are not aware of.
Right.
Like maybe they're punishing themselves like Larry is. Maybe they have avoidance of their emotions like Jane does.
Right.
Maybe they're repeatedly going into situations that re-traumatize them, like all of these characters, but certainly Rita is somebody who continues to go into relationships where she's the one being controlled.
Right.
So I help them consider new strategies or strategies that might be more adaptive for them. One of the things that's really hard to do, but I think can be effective, is helping a client sit with pain and hurt and have a safe space to be in those feelings and not avoid them or punish themselves for it or feel too scared. So that can be an effective way to use talk therapy.
Right.
So even though the word talk therapy implies that you're just exchanging words, there's emotions behind that. There's history behind that. There's potentially the retelling of life experiences, of future goals, of anything in someone's timeline. And so I think the best way to summarize that is that talk therapy is an opportunity for the clients themselves to really make the best use of their ability to verbalize and examine their own sense of self.
Right.
And that can look very different depending on the therapist and on the clients. In this setting with this group, they're really dictating what they want to talk about. And you're right, Cliff has basically become the therapist, where he's like, not only are you going to talk, but you're going to say why you're in pain. You're going to tell us why you're in pain.
So Drea, you'd say this episode...
I think this is my favorite episode, even though nothing happened in the actual episode. Like in previous episodes, we've had all these sort of like destructive, catastrophic, end of the world kinds of things happening.
We had a little bit of action in that Cliff was attacking Vic, and we didn't know why.
But it was all happening inside the house. It was kind of in a safe space. And I liked that this episode was centered around therapy, or the idea of therapy, and they were working out all of their troubles just with each other and the dynamics of one another.
And they're prepping for the back half of the season. I mean, they have now established what it is Mr. Nobody is trying to do, and they are trying to figure out a way to block him from doing that. And so I am very excited to see where this goes in the last half of the season. The next episode, of course, being Danny Patrol. So you can always find these.
Wait, who's Danny?
We're going to find out who Danny is. The next episode is Danny Patrol, and that will be 2 weeks from now. As always, you can find these on DCUniverse.com, or you can get the Blu-rays from Warner Brothers and DC. So I'm very excited to see what happens in this back half of the season.
So for folks that want to have some say, I guess, input in what we're doing next, what show we're covering next.
Yeah.
How can they give us that feedback?
Oh, it's so good that you asked. It's actually exactly where I was going with this. Because we are going into the last half of the season, we need to know what we're covering after these next 8 episodes. We are putting up a poll on our Patreon. Now, Drea, we're going to put up this poll 1 week from today. It'll go up next Friday. Do we go ahead and tell people, in order to build up a lather to vote, what their 3 options are? Or do we let them wait until next week?
I think we let them wait until next week. Unless you were going to say no?
I was thinking we go ahead and...
I really hope it's not the 1966 live action Batman movie. I've been avoiding this forever and ever.
Look, we've got to do it sometime. We might as well do it next. It is not on the list. We have 3 titles on the list. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you.
Okay.
So that
tell me, because clearly I've forgotten.
So that next Friday, you can go to Patreon and you can turn in your vote. You have the option between, and you're going to have to explain this one to me because it's a title I am not familiar with at all. Season 1 of an animated series called Steven Universe.
Which just announced that they're ending. They have a finale coming up, which is huge.
I don't know anything about it. Why did you choose Steven Universe as one of the 3 in our list?
This is a show that has such a positive fandom. Like, the folks who watch this show are just incredibly thoughtful. It's an animated show, but it has a lot of young adult and generally adult themes.
Oh, so it's a deep show.
It's super smart. Yeah, and it handles a lot of different concepts and topics related to relationships and identity and emotions. And I think that we would have a lot to talk about if we did the show.
And it's one that you get asked for a lot.
People have asked me, no, actually most people ask me if I've even, like, they want to know if I've watched the show so that they could talk about the show with me.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So we are putting it on as an option on our poll. The second option is a show you mentioned earlier, HBO's Watchmen. This is one that we get asked about a lot, especially as we were getting midway through the first season, I guess the only season. We got asked about this a lot. I loved the show. I know you really loved the show. So it's one I think we would have a lot to talk about. The third option is, and this is a doozy, the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, which you have experience with. I mean, you have done entire articles for major publications on the psychology of Iron Man post Iron Man 3. I mean,
so we would start from
Iron Man, and we would work our way in chronological order all the way up to Endgame. And you are going to dive into the psychology of every single one of these characters and events.
Yeah.
Those are our three options. Next Friday, go to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions and cast your vote. And since we're talking about it, because we have these wonderful Patreon patrons who have donated money, we get to thank them on the show right now, starting with our very first patron ever, our good friend Ariel Neona, who is a wonderful actress that I've worked with a number of times in the Los Angeles 48-Hour Film Project, and one day we'll get to work with outside of the Los Angeles 48-Hour Film Project. Another fantastic actor and dear friend of ours, Mr. Todd Stashwick, who folks would know from 12 Monkeys, and of course his role in Gotham on the CW. So for you Batman fans, Todd Stashwick, thank you very much. We also have Verdigree, one of our new patrons, Leslie Brownlee, J. Griffin Hughes, Wesley Farber, Maria Diego, our good friend, and someone very familiar with the show. And if you listeners have been with us long enough, you definitely know Rev Sully himself, Eric O'Sullivan. Thank you for donating. But I cannot end this list until I mention the one person most important, my dad. Carl Ward is back. He has donated again, and I get to call him out. And he really wants us to talk about his book. Yes, my father wrote a novel, and it's all about dragons in the mountains of North Carolina.
We're going to have to have another podcast about
all about
this
the novel
book.
I mean, it's a good book. He is the reason I love fantasy, and this book is, hey, I'm going to go ahead and plug it. It's available on Amazon.
Hey, wait, that's not the level of his donation.
Well, we don't have a donation for plugs, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway.
You're so generous.
Yeah. So, go find my dad's book. You're going to love it. I'm in it. I'm a character in it as Brian. Everyone else in my family is also written into it. They are all different people. I'm Brian. I get to keep my name. Those are our patrons for this month. Thank you all very much. As always, if you're a patron, you get this show a day early. And I should say that we've started doing analyses of Batman Beyond. Much requested. Batman Beyond, we are doing reactions and analyses. Come find it there as well. Drea, until next time, where can they find you online?
I'm on Twitter at Arkham Asylum Doc, on Instagram, Arkham Asylum Doc, and on LinkedIn, Drea Letamendi. I definitely post stuff on LinkedIn. It is an active social media for me. And then my website is Dr. Drea Psychology. There you can find my articles and some of my videos and clips and things. So please check it out.
You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions. You can find me on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. Be sure to follow our family over at Fanbase Press for all of their latest in news and their own podcasts and their own comics, which are all fantastic. And come find us over at Patreon, patreon.com/Arkham Sessions.
If you're interested in talk therapy for yourself, you can go to psychologytoday.com. They have a directory where you can search all sorts of different mental health providers. Or if you have insurance, they do take insurance there, but if you have a primary care provider and you want to go through that avenue, talk to your physician and say you want psychotherapy, and they can refer you to a provider within your network.
Love it. Until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.